You know, you could easily get $50,000, $100,000 in rent from the right apartment. It's in the right location, the right typography. There is nothing stopping you as a property investor, if you've got the budget, to pull $100,000 per annum out of an apartment. Welcome to the Urban Property Investor. I'm your host, Sam Saggers, here to help you crack the code of real estate wealth. Today's show, another code cracker. Yes, we're going to dig into houses and apartments, the difference between the two in today's marketplace. Is there a lot of value in the apartment space? Is it effectively underpriced right now? Let's explore the big picture when it comes to the Australian residential apartment outlook. I'm pumped to do today's show. I love a good apartment, and I think right now there is some good opportunity in that space if you understand what to look out for. So let's dig into it. Welcome back, regulars. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your earballs. And of course, if it's your first time hearing the program, there's a few rules that we have here. One, try and play me in double speed, get your life back. That'll give you opportunity to spend more time doing other things. And of course, all of the podcasts I've done are actually lessons on real estate. So if you feel like learning more about the Australian economy or how to invest in real estate, make sure you dance about, go back in time. Feel free to explore past episodes I've done and wake the senses. But hey, I'm back from the desert. Yes, I've been to the outback. I've explored Uluru. I've been to Alice Springs. That's what I've been doing. And I tell you what, it's quite shocking what I found. Yes, if you want to experience extreme inflation and extreme cost of living, then move to the outback. Petrol is $3 a litre. $3 a litre. And I guess it's a good reminder as to why we should be property investors, because anyone living in the outback is paying effectively about 40% more than anyone living in an urban area for their basics: food, water, and fuel. And I think there's a lot to be learned from my little exploration to the outback, in the context that inflation is one of those little beasts that comes and gets you if you're not looking. And of course, I think with the way the world's headed, where energy prices could end up, a lot of people are planning for a big picture retirement, but effectively may have that stripped away through inflation. So I think the point of investing is a very, very important one. We all need to become investors in one way, shape, or form, whether it's through property or other means. But I just happen to teach people about real estate. I've been doing it a long, long time now. And a big part of my journey today is simply sharing information on where the real estate market is headed and how to be a property investor. But today we're going to dig into apartments. Their recent article by my old mate at the Financial Review, Neela Sweeney, apartment values rising faster than houses in 50% of suburbs. Wow. There you go. Does that mean 50% of other suburbs, houses are rising faster than apartments? I think we all love a good sneaky headline, but there has been some sluggish growth in apartments, and I wanted to discuss how you can make sure you're investing in an unsluggish apartment when it comes to growth. I think property investors as well, quite often in the industry, there is a lot of social judgment when it comes to apartments. In fact, because of really the context that people will judge the apartment space, the theory of social judgment. Quite often people cheat themselves out of big opportunities through the apartment space because it's seen as a bit taboo to go off and buy an apartment. And I liken it to Man United versus Manchester City. Yes, 20 years ago, no one in their right mind would have socially followed Man City except for diehard Man City fans around the world. Manchester United spread across the globe, the great soccer team. And it was socially cool to barrack for Man United. It was not socially cool to barrack for Man City. Today, though, the tide has turned, and today Manchester City is kind of what Manchester United was. It's kind of like socially cool now to follow the great Manchester City. So the way people interpret things and socially judge things plays a part as to how people often invest. And apartments are quite often socially judged, or rather misjudged, as a vehicle of wealth creation. Now, I recently helped knock on a door and get a deal for a client who owned a piece of real estate, a nice, high-quality 3-bedroom apartment in Brisbane. And after literally 12 months of owning that property, she has been offered $1.5 million more for the same property she settled 1.5 years ago. And again, so many people could have bought that property, but they socially misjudged the context of apartment investment. They didn't take the opportunity to strike the deal because basically their bias, if you like, concluded that apartments do not make great investments. So I want to have a show dedicated to apartments can make great investments. There is nuances to learn, and today I want to go through some of those nuances connected to the apartment space. But I think it's fair to say that over the next sort of 15, 20 years, there's going to be a need for all sorts of properties, whether they're houses, townhouses, or apartments. Our population's going to increase. There's going to be a rising level of incomes associated to the workforce. And of course, the economy as a whole is going to grow by some $860 billion over really the next decade. So there's a lot of money that is yet to go around, which will be part of the economy. In fact, we know that through inflationary forecasts and through the jobs market being basically zero unemployment, that wages will eventually rise to meet the demands of the marketplace. So more jobs, higher wages, and more people sharing a larger growth output of the economy is really the future. And of course, that means that people are going to effectively need housing. And today, if we were to examine residential, there's some really 500,000 homes that should exist that do not exist. And the problem is getting even worse. We are now in a real housing shortage. Things are really starting to fall apart. And of course, I often talk about this, that Australia's economy is a population growth economy. In fact, we are the second fastest growing populace in the world behind Canada. And, to put it in context, Japan has a negative population growth rate of -5%. China has a negative population growth rate of -1%, and Australia's population growth rate over the next decade is suggested to be over 15%. So again, we're in a pretty unique period of economics where there's simply just not enough product being built, and the product that is being built is not able to keep up with the migration-related demand. So to put it in context, Sydney's population is expected to grow by 7% over the next 5 years, 15% over the next 10 years, and over the next 15 years, over 23% more people living in Sydney. You think Sydney's crammed today, you haven't seen anything. Obviously, to house 23% more people, you're going to need housing. And of course, the idea of going further and further and further afield for housing is one way to tackle the situation. The other way to tackle the situation is to go more vertical when it comes to how people live. Effectively, though, we have just terrible levels of supply at the moment. And in fact, if you went back to the peak of supply prior to the Royal Commission, there was a lot of product floating around. And over the next decade, there will be around 50% less product produced than in the peak of 2017. So product is going to be at a premium when it comes to apartments. There's just simply no apartments being produced, while houses can be created far more cheaply and inexpensively through the project home space. The apartment market is more challenging. Sydney has a estimated shortfall of apartments that are around 14,000 per annum. Melbourne is even worse. Melbourne is delivering around 10,000 apartments per annum, but should actually be putting around 38,000 apartments into its economy per annum. And Brisbane, things don't get much better up there either. So our three biggest cities are devoid of new construction with apartments. Now, one of the challenges with new apartments is typically the places where new apartments go have very expensive land to begin with, and the cost to deliver and build an apartment is far greater than that of a house. So if you wanted to put an apartment in downtown Sydney, it's like down at the Rocks, it's $100,000 a meter to provide that to the market. So apartments are actually morphing into high-end luxury products, and it's an interesting transformation for developers to make things work. They're having to go into a much more luxury space to supply the marketplace. So there is only around 11% of apartments which are being produced sub $700,000. So not a lot of product that would end up in the hands of investors. And again, investors are landlords. Landlords get a rent. It's estimated by 2028, the average apartment will rise by $155 per week in rent. It's around a 28% increase on where we are today. So apartments are going to be little cash cows. If you have the right apartment, you're going to do very, very well. And the average 2-bedroom apartment will rise by $155 a week. Now, if you've got a better than average 2-bedroom apartment, you could be getting $200, $250, $300 a week rise over the next 5 years, which is exciting. And of course, when it comes to demand for the apartment space. Obviously, affordability plays a part. We're obviously in a much higher rate environment, and there is no inducement really that is floating around at the moment. If we cast our mind back to home builder and COVID, there was massive inducements to go build a effectively family home. And of course, low rates meant a lot of people got involved in the housing space. It's kind of the polar opposite now. Now things are less affordable. And of course, when times are less affordable, really the apartment market begins to do very, very well. And really the percentage of people buying apartments today is a good blend. You've got first home buyers, upgraders, local investors, and downsizers making up the majority of buyers that are tapping into the apartment dynamic. When it comes to will values increase in apartments, CBRE, National Valuer, recently reviewed their valuation arms basically take on the apartment space. And a lot of the valuers that were polled responded indicating that apartment values are expected to increase by over 5%, closer to 10% when it comes to their investment worth, their investment value. So there is some good signals coming out of the apartment space that times are changing and potentially there is growth around the corner. Now, I like to explore apartments. I think they make great investments. Typically, when I buy an apartment, I also factor in that apartments can have very, very good rents. They can be cash cows. By way of example, you could easily get $50,000, $100,000 in rent from the right apartment. It's in the right location, the right typography. There is nothing stopping you as a property investor, if you've got the budget, to pull $100,000 per annum out of an apartment. That's a lot of money from one single investment. Jason, who's my business partner, he just settled on a property. He's now getting $125,000 in rent on that investment per annum. So big money can be produced out of the apartment space. But if we actually study the apartment growth space, we can see there's been a lack of growth in certain marketplaces of recent times. And if I was to study the three major markets in Australia, Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne, we can see Melbourne's average apartment growth rate since 1980 is 7.1%. But according to Pro Solutions, the growth has not actually unfolded in that marketplace. Since 2011, there's been basically zero growth. So if you bought an apartment in Melbourne in 2011, you'd be like, whoa, apartments don't make money. The same thing really happened in Brisbane, and what a lot of people did was buy real estate in Brisbane 2012, 13, 14, 15, got really no growth from houses or apartments, and then all of a sudden in 2021, everything just skyrocketed in value. So real estate doesn't necessarily just grow year on year. There are periods of low growth followed by periods of robust growth. If we look at Sydney, it's been about 7 years now before the apartment market has done much at all. But previous to that, between 2009 and 2016, the apartment market in Sydney was doing 9.4%. So some incredible numbers when it comes to can apartments grow in value. They certainly can. It's just a matter of understanding what makes a good property investment as an apartment. And arguably, the right apartment complex is growing in value. I know I've got an apartment in Melbourne. It's a cracking apartment. It's gone up $250,000 since 2019. So that's 5 years. It has a growth rate of around 8.6%. And it's not following the trend of the market average. It's much better than the market average. So why is it better than the market average as a growth rate? Well, let's explore why. Let's explore what we should look for when it comes to choosing an apartment. Now, I think one of the major benefits as to why a lot of people will choose the apartment space, and we're talking obviously every weekend in Sydney, there's 1,000 auctions. In Melbourne, there's like 600-700 auctions. Like there's a lot of business happening all the time in Australian real estate. And quite often the property investment space is such a small little niche, but obviously speaks a lot about the idea of investment, whereas the owner-occupier market rarely has a voice, if you like, when it comes to what is going on the weekends, other than auction clearance rates. But right now, if we were to look at some of the gaps unfolding between houses and apartments, Melbourne, for example, which is very similar to other marketplaces, there's a 53% gap between what a house costs and what an apartment actually is marketed at the moment. And that gap was as low as 20% back in June 2013. So now we're at 53%. The argument is, will the gap start to close? Will Melbourne's long-term gap, which is 34%, will Sydney's long-term gap, Brisbane's long-term gap close? And when you're at 53% in a major place like Melbourne and your long-term average is a 34% gap, that contraction, if you like, means that houses need to come down or units need to go up, or a combination of both. And so today, the gap between the two is quite sizable. If we took the median house value in Australia versus the combined capital's median unit price, houses are $944 and apartments are $650. So you can see there's a big gap there already when it comes to what is more affordable. So I think it's important to understand apartments and understand that there's been eras of apartment design and product delivery. And like houses, there are both good apartments and bad apartments. And I think for a lot of people, they have bought themselves a bad apartment and spread the word not to buy apartments. But really, instead of saying don't buy apartments, really the better language should be don't buy a bad apartment. And to understand bad apartments, you really need to understand the history of building, construction, and apartment design in Australia, because there's been some absolutely cracking eras of apartment development, which have gone on to create huge amounts of capital growth for investors, for homeowners, and there has been lackluster eras as well. And I think the gap between houses and apartments will remain wide, because I would say a large percentage of apartments may never ultimately increase too much in value because they were designed poorly. They are not great properties. They do not have good owner-occupier appeal. And I think what you'll find is there is always a lag of apartment growth at a macro level when you take the whole apartment median and put it in a data set, because there are just simply bad eras of apartments. And if I was to split the eras in 4 categories, I think you would see a different data set unfold when it comes to capital growth. The first clear winner when it comes to an era of great apartments and what would make a great property investment today is the Art Deco era of apartments. Big, wide homes, beautiful architectural design, great, typically in great suburbs, great land characteristics, great location characteristics, and great building characteristics when it comes to the old school Art Deco apartments, which are typically found in places like Sydney and Melbourne. That era sort of began in the circa 1930s, and it stood the test of time. They're simply just not making product like that today. So it does stand out as an era of fine investment and solid capital growth. Again, it's a bit of a misnomer to say apartments are, bad investments. Art Deco apartments are not bad investments whatsoever. And so it's an interesting era. I think it's an era which, is worth parking your hard-earned money into. The next era, which is very common in Australia, is really that 1960s to 1980s era, the red brick, very homogenous era. Suburbs of just red brick, building after building, walk-ups. These investments are really past their use-by date. And if you think about it today, they haven't aged like the Art Deco buildings. Today, some of these complexes are now 65 years of age, and they look 65 years of age. They look tired, run down, and really from an investment point of view, the building is very homogeneous. It's very the same as everything else which was created during that era. Now, again, that era was served by the baby boomers. All the baby boomers were basically born during that period, and they basically needed homes to live in. And so at that period of time, the red brick period of construction occurred. And really today, if you look at the design of those homes, they're pretty basic. There's not a lot of natural light. The windows are very, very small. The concrete is starting to crack. You can see quite often the foyer, for example, isn't a beautiful, inspired foyer. It's basically you walk into them and there's, some mail littered on the ground and, a dead pot plant in the corner. So from an investment perspective, the red brick era is a bit touch and go. And I think really what you are seeing now is these buildings, the owners are banding together to just offload the building as a knockdown rebuild. And again, some of these buildings had very expensive concrete cancer connected to them. And really the era of that period, if you like, it's just past its use by date. I don't think anyone feels inspired to go to a red brick building today and pay bucket loads of money for it. I'm sure there's certainly the odd one which has stood the test of time in a nice, charming street. But for the most part, they are past their use by date. And again, even the strata schemes, I don't think they've been the best run because ultimately, the look and feel of them is really past its use by date. So then we go from really the Art Deco era to the red brick homogeneous era to probably even a worse era, which is between 1990 to really as early as 2017. And we call this the mass production era of apartments. Basically, Australia changed its business plan, became a country of highly skilled migration. To do that, you needed a lot of students to come to the country to join our university system. And all of a sudden, Australia decided to double down on its population. In order to do that, it started to mass produce basically modern apartment complexes with little design features to them. And again, the impact of really the mass production era, really the developers, if you like, were developing for a non-owner occupier audience. So a lot of the apartments were at the time sold through foreign investment channels. Say in middle of Shanghai, you'd get, literally 100 Shanghainese buy a building in downtown Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne. And that would then get occupied by overseas students effectively. And the building was never produced to a high level of finish or a high level of standard to impress upon the owner-occupier space. So again, if we were to go back to 80% of what is apartment stock today in the Australian real estate market landscape in Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, your 80% of the product will be red brick homogeneous product or the mass production era of Australian real estate. And again, both eras, the red brick and the mass production era, are just terrible eras of apartment design. And really the impact of their eras will be shown in the capital growth rates of their performance. And again, I think what we're actually seeing in the data is that certain apartments are just never going to perform, and the gap between houses and apartments is going to continue to be quite wide because 80% of the product type was produced in a period of homogeneous mass scale production. They were poorly designed apartments to begin with. Certainly the mass production era was probably the worst era. And then previous to that, the red brick era has made people money, but I would say the best of its performance is in its past, not its future. And so it leads us to where we are today. And today we are in what is known as the better building era. Now, the better building guidelines came into place in certain states at different periods. If I was to examine Melbourne's better building era, it began basically in 2017. What the better standard or better building era is it recognized that basically the production of apartments was being produced for effectively non-residents, and living in those apartments, those small, itchy little apartments, was not going to serve the future of Australian housing. So government actually came up with some reforms called the Better Design Standards. And today, if you look at the buildings being produced, they are, again, rather going back to the way it was in the Art Deco era. They're certainly not homogenous. The buildings don't look the same. They certainly not mass-produced for a non-owner-occupier market. They are produced for an owner-occupier marketplace. And so what you're seeing is just better design. And again, I'll go back to the red brick era. You know, you're lucky to have a window. Today, you can get buildings which are effectively beautifully curved, all glass designs. You can get some really, really good design in apartment space. So again, the most modern apartments, and actually our oldest apartments being the Art Deco era, are probably the best bets when it comes to getting capital growth. I know the $250,000 I've gained from an apartment down in Melbourne when the market's done 0% capital growth. A lot of the principles behind that are great land, great location, and a great design team. I used other people's design prowess to make money out of the real estate. And again, the architect on that specific piece of real estate was John Wardell. John Wardell is one of Australia's best architects. If you've ever been to Gucci in Pitt Street Mall, John Wardell designed Gucci. Again, some of the best architects are taking charge of some of these modern era apartments. Koichi Takada designed, some of the most amazing buildings in the world. He's today designing some of the greatest apartments in Australia. So again, like we're now in a completely new era where the end user is not an overseas student for an apartment. The end user is an owner-occupier, first homeowner, upgrader, downsizer. These are the people the apartments are designed for. And that is a beautiful thing. That is a good thing. And within the better building design standards, you're getting things like cross-flow ventilation. You're getting all sorts of greenscape connected architectural elements to buildings. And today, you're just simply in a much better era. And as such, the capital growth rate for the better building era is going to be a lot higher than, for example, the mass production era or the red brick era, and in line with the Art Deco era. So I think it's an important conversation to go, well, okay, I'm an apartment investor. Which era am I buying within? Am I buying in the better buildings era, or am I buying in the red brick era? Now, I'm from Sydney. Sydney is notorious for having terrible building standards, terrible. And I simply would not buy a building in the mass production era of Sydney's era. I would not buy one. They would just be an absolute nightmare to be an owner of. And again, these are some of the reasons why even the capital growth rates are just a lot lower in that space. And again, in Sydney, the better design standards were really lifted in around 2020. In Sydney, government came up with a commissioner who basically goes around and signed off on the building quality of our new buildings. I've recently gone and had a look at a very entry-level property out in Western Sydney, and I was gobsmacked at how good it actually is. It's chalk and cheese. I was having a good chat with the valuer, and the valuer basically said he can put value on the better design features of the new real estate post Sydney's appointment of the new commissioner to make sure building standards are up to scratch. And if you're not familiar with what the commissioner does, he literally goes around to every building and looks at points of construction to make sure the design standards are being met. Obviously, we've had things like Mascot Towers and Opal Towers in Sydney, which, dented certainly consumer confidence in that space. So hence why I like to teach building era. Like, you need to understand the difference, because there are big differences in the reason why things were being produced and who the target audience was. The Art Deco era, a massive target audience of homeowners. The red brick era was really those baby boomers growing up, so many of them, biggest generation created, and all of a sudden they needed housing. The red brick era, homogeneous housing, very simple, performed okay, but it's past its use by date. The 1990s led us to a change in government policy around a big Australia, more people. That also led to the mass production era of Australian real estate. And really, the more modern buildings today, like if you were to shop, say, post 2017 in Melbourne, or 2020 in Sydney, and very similar in Brisbane, you'll find that just the design guidelines are completely different. And ultimately, some of that design guidelines comes at an extra price, but the extra price is built into the value. And again, it's one of the reasons why I think there is some good value to be produced from the better buildings era of Australian real estate. Now, when it comes to understanding how value works with apartments, quite often you'll hear rhetoric around land content. Land content being one of the most important principles of real estate. But obviously, an apartment has a lot of building when it comes to its value, building value. So real estate is often broken down out into land value and building value. And when it comes to apartment dynamics, I think there's kind of three elements to it. One is land content, one is building content, and one is free space content. So how does that all tie together, you ask? Well, great question. Let's explore what that looks like. So the land content, obviously, when you're buying a home, there's a content of land to building ratio or land to asset ratio. So if you were buying $1 million property and 50% of that $1 million was the value of the house, that means 50% of the value you're paying is the value of the land. And again, the more land content you have in housing, quite often the more capital growth you're going to get on the value of the land. Obviously, one way to consider value of apartments is the same theory. Let's say, for example, you had 20 apartments all sharing one block of land. And again, that land was worth $4 million. That means each apartment has a land value component being $200,000. And so the building value may be something completely different. Now, when it comes to apartment content, when it comes to land value, it can be useful, but equally it can be a little bit of, I don't know, I won't call it fake news, but also just there's other ways to consider how to value apartments. And again, like if it was all about land value, you know, New York apartments wouldn't be worth $50 million. Paris, London apartments wouldn't be worth what they're worth. Barangaroos, top floor in the city, which sold for something like $140 million, most expensive real estate in Australia today, would not be worth what it is worth, because the land value of that asset would not be effectively that proportioned. So we need to understand that when it comes to apartments, a lot of the value is actually in the building. The way the building works, the way the building looks, the way the building speaks to the marketplace, the architecture, the design elements. The building is very, very important, and buildings do go up in value. Hence why often you go, well, an Art Deco building, great architecture, has gone up in value. It's not just the land going up in value, it's also the building going up in value. And again, great apartment complexes will be great structures that can increase in value. And though as a tax deduction, we depreciate buildings at 2.5% per annum, the market increase on build is proportionately around 5 or 6% per annum. So again, if the structure is actually a timeless piece, then as building costs rise, so does the value proposition of the building which has been built. And again, though you can depreciate it, which is more of a tool of tax, you can also get appreciation value off a structure, off a building. And again, when I look at the property which I own in Melbourne, 0% capital growth in Melbourne in apartments over the last 5 years, my apartment's gone up $250,000. Really, when I examine what is going up, it is the design elements of the building, not the land value. And again, it does carry land value, but it also carries building value. And I think it's very, very important to understand that as you own a property in apartment space, the building is an important part of the context of an apartment purchase. Hence why I would be very loath to buy a red brick homogeneous apartment today. I think there's no building value left in them. They really just need to be knocked over. If you look at the mass production era, those buildings are horrible. They're ghastly. I can understand why people are scared of apartments when you look at those things. They're just terrible looking buildings. And again, they have low land value, but they have low building value. And you put low land value and low building value together, you're not going to have a successful high capital growth piece of real estate. The other thing I think is really important for apartment ownership is really free space. I'm always a big fan of choosing apartments across the road from the beach or the shops or the cafe district or down the street from the parkland. Where's the green space? Where's the blue space? Where's the coffee space? People live in an apartment for lifestyle. And again, really what I don't invest in is apartments for roofs over people's heads. I generally invest in apartments that are lifestyle orientated area. I'm a big believer in looking for the supply and demand gap between affordable yet highly livable places. And if I can find an apartment in a highly livable place, I know it's going to tick the boxes because the type of person that lives in that space is looking for lifestyle. And so apartments are about lifestyle. They're about building quality as well. Now, again, if we were to look at some of the ideas around making money out of a building, you've got to consider the price versus quality ratio. And again, this is where market lemon theory comes into play. I've explained it a million times. Most people don't know what a good building looks like over a less impressive building. Hence why people will buy a less impressive building at a high price and then wonder why they are getting low rates of growth. The opposite can be said where there's basically a high level of quality design put into a building and the price is effectively undervalued. And again, if I go back to helping that client make a $1.5 million decision, really the price she paid versus the quality she got, there was a massive disconnect. She should have effectively paid more, but she got a bargain, which I door knocked and put together for her. And again, over a $1.5 million uplift on price versus quality. Obviously, when it comes to apartments, you want interrelated value, interconnectedness to the shops, to the mixed use, to the brand, to the parks. Does the real estate carry brand value? Is there an architect connected to the real estate? Are there parks nearby? This is all interrelated value that connects to the building. Obviously, when it comes to the idea of buying anything, there is market value, then there's investment value. Now, again, if I go back to the market value of a mass-produced piece of real estate from the 1990 era to, say, 2017, if I actually look at the town planning of that era, you had 45 square meter one bedrooms. You had 55 square meter two bedrooms. And again, like, it wasn't designed for the owner-occupier space. So what happens is you see the market value of that real estate today and you go, wow, it's only $350,000 for a small two-bedroom apartment. Gee, that's good value. But it is not good value. It is a fool's gold value. It has no investment value. And again, this is why I always harp back to the eras of apartments. Where is the investment value? The investment value is connected to the Art Deco era and the better designed era. Assets that are going to stand the test of time. And really the difference is, and when people are looking and perhaps analyzing real estate themselves, they're going, well, that modern building is $600,000. That mass production area building is $500,000. Wow, that $500,000 mass produced real estate is still a two bedroom unit. I should buy that one because it's $100,000 less than the better designed property. Well, actually, that is not a good move because you are not considering investment value, what the asset is worth to you if you're not going to sell it over a long period of time. And again, over a longer stretch, the better designed building will outperform a quick buzz on a mass-produced piece of real estate. So again, it comes down to the market recognizing investment value. And it has. You just go up to Brisbane, to the Gold Coast, some of the highly designed buildings that are close to the beach, great architects, great building pedigree. The apartments have better designs than 50 years ago, nicer spaces, more volume, no issues with natural light, great floor plans, good frontages, great flow, great ventilation, cross-flow ventilation, really good natural lighting, unbelievable fixtures and fittings, and quite often the buildings have great amenities and lifestyle benefits nearby, as well as good aspects and view lines. And again, like if you just follow some of that rationale, you're going to end up with an asset that can become a bit of a cash cow, because the rental market certainly recognizes the difference. The executive rental market goes, wow, this is an astonishing, good-looking property. It's got great features. It's got great benefits. I can see the city. Even though I don't have views from my apartment, I can go on the roof and check out what's going on. I've got great breakout zones. I'm not living in a box. I'm in a better designed era apartment. And obviously the rental market wants the new shiny toy, and effectively better designed buildings are offering that. Obviously, it's a bit of a rule when it comes to investing. Above average quality buildings will get an above average return. It's as simple as that. Below average quality buildings will get a below average rate of return. So if you're going to buy into a cheap, nasty building, you're probably going to get a low level of capital growth. And again, this is my conclusion as to why the gap between houses and apartments are getting further and further apart, is that really today, 80% of apartments that exist are below average quality apartments, which either need to be knocked down and rebuilt, or effectively were built for a different era of Australia's growth. Today, apartments are being produced for the owner-occupier market. There is no foreign investment really occurring inside of Australia today. So you can't grab a building and go to Shanghai and, try and sell it over there, because the market's not there. The Chinese can't get their money out of China like they used to be able to do, to effectively money launder money out of their country into a safe haven like Australia. So all of a sudden, you've got an underpriced product type, but you've also got a very scarce product type, because when you think about it, there is not a lot of properties produced after 2017 that exist today, and there is not a lot of Art Deco buildings that exist today. And there's a bucket load of the other junk in the middle, which you don't want. It's like buying, a problem, not an opportunity. And so obviously, market lemon theory is a real theory. So just be really, really careful. Follow the eras and you'll get the result. And of course, today, some of the best buildings are part of what is known as placemaking. And I've spoken about placemaking before. I think it's just absolutely incredible today that some of the best architects in the world are making places connected to apartments. Placemaking is all about the idea that an apartment complex today is a home, it's a workplace, it's got breakout rooms, it's got home theaters, it's got outdoor areas, it's got its own food garden. One building I just walked through has its own bees to look after and make sure the flowers are effectively, I don't even know what the word is, populating or blossoming. So these ecosystems are just next level since the better design standards. And I would encourage really anyone to go and have a look at a modern, better design building and see what you think, and go and compare it to, a mass production era. You'll see a complete difference. Even the smell, the look, oh my God, the lifts, the foyer, there's no dead pot plant in the corner when you walk in. It's right. And the right apartment today is still a great stepping stone to property wealth. It just needs more understanding, and great design and good design is really what the apartment space is now about. Now, there are minimum apartment sizes which exist today, which is a good thing. The better design standards brought that in. You can't just have small little places today. You've got to have a certain frontage, a certain airflow coming through the apartment. You've got to have a certain level of circulation space. And again, circulation space is a very important dynamic in a modern apartment. How does someone move around? How does the floor plan flow? And again, the right floor plan with the right apartment is absolutely a money maker. I was even thinking of becoming a buyer's agent for floor plans within apartment complexes. Just buy this floor plan and you're going to make money. Because there are effectively just some good money makers out there. And of course, natural light is such a big draw card to living in an apartment. And again, if you go back to even you could go to the Art Deco era, but I won't punish that. But that red brick era, geez, like, man, the windows, they're so small. They're so small. Like, and that's where you get the mold problems and the rising damp and all these kind of issues, because they were just, at the time, mass produced. And so we just want to avoid the mass production era. This is the main point of today's show. So there's two mass production eras. We want to avoid them. But today you can buy an apartment and 90% of the apartment will get natural light. Again, the right balconies, the right direction facing, the right orientation, the right storage space, the right cross-flow ventilation, the right community scheme, the right community space. Today, the right apartment has high thermal efficiency. Today, the right apartment will have solar that effectively looks after the building. I was in one building the other week and it had something like, it must have been like 9 Tesla solar batteries running basically the common property, and on the roof, effectively just full solar. And there is really a very low body corporate for the building because of its ability to create its own energy, which is amazing. This is the better design era. Again, these are some of the cost-effective savings that owner-occupiers will just love. And of course, today, better landscaping, which I think is important, better materials, non-toxic, durable, better standards all around, better glazing, and ultimately a lot of thinking around free space and green space. So that's how to understand apartment buying. Because of affordability constraints, today some people are needing to look at the apartment market space. Just follow my tips and you'll do well out of apartments. I've certainly done very well. I've had some clients do some great numbers of late, specifically out of the Brisbane marketplace, which has obviously got a bit of a push market growth effect off the last couple of years. But the same thing will unfold in other marketplaces. It just needs its turn to get the market nudge. And then the market will recognize the difference between the eras. And because of scarcity, the general principle of scarcity, we will see the right apartments do very, very well from a capital growth perspective. All right, folks, that's it from me. Hope you enjoyed the show. Please leave a review. It'd be really helpful. All right, I'm off. Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Property Investor. To never miss an episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite app or on YouTube. And I would love it if you could give the show a rating and share it with your friends and family. In between episodes, you can always keep in touch with me by connecting on social media over Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Until we meet again on the next episode of The Urban Property Investor, take care and bye for now.